Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going way back, exploring the life of Hafsa bint Umar,
Hmm.
a woman whose story is like woven into the very fabric of early Islam.
Yeah.
Our guide for this is a lecture by Dr. Omar Suleiman.
Okay.
So get ready for some serious storytelling and historical insights.
I love it.
Okay, so you know how we all have those moments like, ugh, my name.
Haha.
Well, imagine if you were nicknamed the Little One
Oh, wow.
because your dad was saving his favorite names for your brothers.
Ouch.
That was Hafsa, and it gets so much more interesting.
Really?
Yeah. So her family's like a who's who of early Islam.
Yeah, I mean, obviously her father, Umar ibn AlKhattab, played a big role.
Huge.
Yep.
But even her extended family's full of these fascinating figures.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like her aunt, Zainab bint Matun, one
Yeah.
of the first Muslims to migrate to Abyssinia.
And ended up being the first Meccan buried in Medina.
It's pretty amazing.
And then her first husband, Kunais ibn Hudhaifa, was among the very first to convert to Islam.
One of the first 20.
Imagine that. It really sets the stage for Hafsa's upbringing, surrounded by this intense faith and conviction.
Even before her father converted.
Talk about deep roots.
Yeah. It makes you wonder what it was like back then, you know?
To be a part of that small group going through all that opposition.
Totally. But before we get too far ahead,
Yeah.
there's that big misconception about Umar that Dr. Suleiman tackles in his lecture.
The one about burying his daughters alive during the Jahiliyyah period.
Exactly.
It's one of those stories that you hear all the time.
But when you look at the evidence, it doesn't hold up.
Right.
I mean, female infanticide did exist in pre-Islamic Arabia,
for sure.
but attributing it to Umar specifically just isn't accurate.
Dr. Suleiman actually uses Hafsa's existence.
And the mention of another daughter, Fatima,
Right. As evidence against that whole myth.
like case closed.
It really shows the importance of being critical of sources.
And remembering the historical context.
Which is so relevant even today.
Oh, totally.
Okay, so now let's get into Hafsa's second marriage. This is where things get good.
Uh-huh.
So after Kunais passes away,
Hmm.
Umar, being, a devoted dad,
Yeah,
starts looking for a suitable husband for Hafsa.
right.
First, he approaches Uthman ibn Affan,
Okay.
and then, get this, Abu Bakr.
Wow. It really shows you how things worked back then.
Right.
Like marriage was a strategic move to strengthen relationships.
Total power move.
Yeah.
So, of course, they both turned him down. But it makes you wonder if they already knew the prophet's intentions.
I mean, their reluctance kind of suggests they did right.
And imagine how awkward those conversations must have been.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine?
Like, hey, want to marry my daughter? Never mind the prophet's calling dibs. Too funny. But anyway, Omar was overjoyed when the prophet himself proposed.
Of course. I mean, talk about solidifying relationships.
Yeah, this was huge for the early Muslim community.
Definitely.
So now Hafsa's married to the prophet,
Okay.
which brings her into this close relationship with Aisha.
Another one of his wives.
And Dr. Suleiman shares this funny story about them both accidentally breaking a voluntary fast.
Really?
Yeah, they were both super hungry, and this delicious food shows up.
Uh-oh.
They just couldn't resist.
It's so human, you know?
It is. And it shows that they were just like us.
Yeah, even the prophet's wives had these relatable moments.
And their different personalities really shine through.
How so?
Well, Hafsa, being impulsive like her father, immediately confesses to the prophet.
Okay.
But Aisha, she's thinking strategically, trying to figure out the best way to tell him.
That's so Aisha.
Right.
Always thinking a few steps ahead.
Of course, the prophet's response is a great lesson about the flexibility of voluntary fasting.
Yeah.
But this little incident actually foreshadows a later event that causes Omar a lot of stress.
Oh, what happened?
So he'd heard that some of the prophet's wives were arguing with him.
Oh.
And knowing Hafsa's tendency to speak her mind,
Yeah.
he rushes to warn her against doing the same.
Ha ha. Classic Omar.
Right. He was so worried she would jeopardize her marriage.
Oh, that's sweet in a way.
Yeah. It's nice to see that even these towering figures had their family dramas.
It makes them seem more human, you know?
Totally. But all drama aside, Hafsa was known for being incredibly pious.
Absolutely.
Dr. Suleiman really emphasizes her devotion.
Her constant fasting and night prayers.
Really remarkable.
It is. And what's interesting is that a lot of the narrations she transmitted focus specifically on the prophet's own acts of worship.
Oh, wow.
So we get this glimpse into his spiritual life.
Seeing his commitment to a simple lifestyle even as he leads this growing community.
Yeah. They're really unique and insightful.
They add a whole other dimension to what we know about him.
Exactly.
But Hafsa's piety wasn't always easy.
Hmm.
This next story, which scholars call the incident of the divorce,
Okay.
shows that she and everyone around the prophet faced real challenges.
What happened?
So there was this period where the prophet and his wives separated.
Really?
And this is where we get to see Omar's personality shine through. He hears about the arguments between the prophet and his wives.
Oh,
And being the protective dad he is,
of course.
he rushes to warn Hafsa.
Makes sense.
And then he hears this rumor that the prophet has divorced all of his wives.
Wow. That's intense.
Omar is completely devastated.
Oh, man.
He goes to console Hafsa, but then he's stuck waiting to see the prophet.
While the rumors are flying around.
It's a real nail-biter.
I bet. So what happens when he finally sees the prophet?
Well, he walks in and sees the prophet living in these incredibly simple conditions, and it brings him to tears.
Wow. Why?
He's thinking, why are you living like this when you could have so much more?
That makes sense.
He's urging the prophet to seek more material prosperity for the Muslims.
To elevate their status.
Yeah. But, for a second, he forgets that the prophet's focus is on the hereafter.
He's caught up in the moment.
Yeah, he's worried, he's emotional.
I get it.
But the prophet gently rebukes him,
Oh.
reminding him that their real reward is in the afterlife, not worldly possessions.
It's an important reminder.
Yeah, it's about priorities and detaching from material wealth.
Definitely a lesson for all times.
So how does Hafsa fit into all of this?
Well, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Angel Gabriel appears to the prophet
Why?
and reveals that Hafsa is totally innocent in this whole thing.
That's a relief.
And he praises her piety, even saying she'll be the prophet's wife in paradise.
Wow, talk about divine approval.
It shows how highly God regarded her.
It wasn't just her family, it was her devotion and commitment.
Exactly. And of course, the prophet reconciles with Hafsa, and that brings the separation to an end.
That's good.
This whole episode is so revealing. You know?
So many ways.
It shows us the dynamics within the prophet's household
The complexities of their society.
and the importance of divine guidance when things get tough.
Absolutely. It also shows Hafsa's resilience and spiritual strength.
Oh, for sure. But her story doesn't end there.
Oh, what else happened?
Well, after the prophet passed away, she was entrusted with the original manuscript of the Quran.
Wow. Imagine that responsibility.
I know. And when Uthman decided to standardize the Quranic text,
During his caliphate.
right, he borrowed Hafsa's copy to make multiple copies to send out everywhere.
So one woman played this huge role in preserving Islam's most sacred text.
Pretty amazing, right?
It really makes you appreciate the influence women had back then.
It does. And her story doesn't stop there.
What else is there?
She followed in her father's footsteps, becoming a caretaker for orphans.
Wow. She could have lived a life of privilege and political influence.
She chose a different path.
A path of devotion and service.
And Dr. Suleiman mentions that she deliberately stayed out of the political chaos after Uthman's assassination.
That's interesting. I wonder why.
Well, remember, her father always warned her against getting into disputes.
Especially with the prophet.
Right? Maybe she took that to heart and just wanted to focus on her spirituality and her community.
It's also interesting to contrast that with Aisha's involvement in the Battle of the Camel.
Which came out of that same conflict.
Maybe seeing all that division and bloodshed made Hafsa step back.
It's possible. We don't have any direct statements from her explaining her choice.
But it seems like she really valued peace and unity.
Yeah, especially because she actually said she was grateful for not being involved in that fight.
Wow. That's a powerful statement.
It is. It speaks to her wisdom and her understanding of how bad things can get.
Yeah. So despite choosing a life outside of politics, she still left this incredible legacy.
Absolutely.
Okay, so tell me about this next anecdote.
Okay, so years after the prophet's death, Hafsa notices her father, who's now the caliph,
Yeah.
wearing these patched up clothes.
Well-
And she suggests that maybe he should dress a little fancier, for his position.
Like, come on, Dad, you're the caliph.
Exactly. But his response is so moving.
What does he say?
He starts crying, remembering the prophet's simple lifestyle and how much they both loved and respected him.
That's beautiful.
It shows you what was truly important to them.
Yeah. It's like the prophet's example stayed with them even after all these years.
It's about inner values, not outward appearances.
So true. Okay, so Dr. Suleiman ends Hafsa's story with this incredible image that connects her to today.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So he explains how Hafsa's house in Medina
Where she lived out her final years.
is now part of the Prophet's mosque.
Wow, really?
Seriously. And when people stand at a certain spot to greet the prophet,
Yeah.
they're standing in what was once Hafsa's home.
Chills. That's powerful.
Just imagine the history in that space.
It's like her life is woven into that sacred place.
And it makes you think about how our own lives might leave a mark centuries from now.
What will people remember about us?
What stories will they tell?
Good questions to think about.
Yeah. But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
let's circle back to those individual stories that bring history to life.
Yes, we get so caught up in the big picture
But it's those personal stories that make it feel real.
and relatable.
Like with Hafsa, her story challenges so many assumptions about women in early Islam.
It does.
She wasn't passive at all
No, she actively shaped her own life.
and contributed to the Muslim community in so many ways.
Her story shows the diversity of experiences back then.
There wasn't just one way to be a Muslim or contribute.
And that's still relevant today.
Definitely. It's like there's this richness and complexity to Islamic history that we often overlook.
We focus on the battles and the political figures.
But it's the everyday lives of people that make it come alive,
And those individual stories have the power to inspire us.
challenge us, and connect us to something bigger.
Exactly. Like with Hafsa, her life reminds us that true greatness doesn't always come from worldly success
It can come from devotion, kindness, and service.
and from standing up for what you believe in.
Like when she refused to be quiet when she knew she was right.
Exactly. She had this inner strength and conviction.
She navigated tough situations and stayed true to her values.
And she wasn't afraid to speak truth to power, even when it meant confronting her own father.
Wow. It's like a reminder that we all have a voice,
And we should use it to stand up for what's right.
even when it's hard.
What I find especially inspiring about Hafsa's story is that it ends quietly. She dedicated her last years to prayer, service, and reflection.
It's like she found peace and fulfillment in those simple acts.
And it's a good reminder that sometimes the most meaningful moments happen in the quiet spaces.
Away from all the noise and distractions.
And those quiet moments can have a huge impact.
Think about it. Millions of people visit the Prophet's mosque every year.
And many stand right where Hafsa's house used to be.
Her life and her legacy continue to touch people from all over.
It's amazing
And it brings us back to Dr. Suleiman's point.
that this deep dive is just the beginning.
There are so many fascinating stories waiting to be discovered
Stories that can change how we understand Islam.
and challenge our views of the past.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with this thought.
What stories from your life or your family do you want to share?
And what lessons have you learned from the past that you want to carry into the future?
Because you're part of a bigger story.
A story that connects us across time and space.
Your actions and choices matter.
They can shape that story.
So go out there and make your mark.
Leave a legacy that reflects your best self.
And inspires others.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time for another journey into the past.
See you then. You know, it really is amazing how her personal space became this like sacred ground.
I know, right?
Like millions of people connect with the history of Islam right there.
It's wild. And her story just keeps echoing through time, doesn't it?
It really does.
We've been talking about her as this daughter, wife, friend.
Right.
But she was also this major figure in the early Muslim community.
Oh, absolutely. It really challenges that idea that women were just sidelined back then.
Oh.
Like Hafsa was so involved both personally and in passing on knowledge about the Prophet.
For sure. And don't forget about her role in preserving the Quran.
Cute.
Shows how much they trusted her.
Yeah.
But you know, something I've been thinking about is that point about her choosing to stay away from all that political turmoil.
After Uthman's assassination.
Yeah. Why do you think that was?
Well, it's really interesting to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
We know her father, Umar, always warned her about getting involved in disputes.
Especially with the Prophet.
Right, so maybe she just took that advice to heart
Okay.
and decided to focus on her own spiritual growth and helping her community.
That makes sense. It's also kind of interesting to contrast that with Aisha
Oh, yeah.
and her role in the Battle of Camel.
Which came out of that same conflict.
Maybe seeing all that division and violence made Hafsa choose a different path.
Yeah, it's possible. We don't know for sure why she did it,
Right.
but knowing her, it seems like she really valued peace and unity.
Especially since she said she was actually grateful for not being involved.
Right. That's a big statement.
It is. It shows real wisdom.
And an understanding of how quickly things can spiral out of control.
So even though she didn't go into politics, she still made a huge impact.
Without a doubt.
She dedicated herself to worship, took care of orphans, and shared her knowledge of the Prophet.
She really lived what Islam teaches, you know?
Faith, Compassion, humility.
Think about it. Even though she didn't write books or give big speeches,
Right.
her life still teaches us so much.
That's so true. Sometimes the quietest lives have the most to say.
Absolutely. Our world's obsessed with fame and fortune,
I know.
but Hafsa makes you rethink what really matters.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Right. Is it worldly achievements or is it something more?
Big questions. And that's what's so cool about these deep dives.
They make us think.
And with Hafsa, it's even wilder because her home is part of the Prophet's mosque now.
It's incredible.
Like her personal space is this sacred place that's open to millions of people.
Talk about a lasting impact.
It makes you wonder whose homes will be the landmarks of the future, whose lives will inspire people generations from now.
That's a thought-provoking question. It reminds us that we're all part of history in the making. Everything we do contributes to the legacy we leave behind.
It's like Hafsa's story is telling us to live with purpose,
To make our lives mean something.
Maybe to find ways to connect the past and present and leave a mark that goes beyond time and place.
Yeah, I love that.
It's really amazing how these deep dives just take you there.
It is.
Like we spent this time walking with Hafsa, getting to know her and seeing her world.
Almost like we can feel those echoes in the Prophet's mosque.
Right where her house was.
It brings her story full circle.
It really does. And it makes you wonder, how our lives will leave a mark like that.
Centuries from now.
What will people remember about us? What will they say?
Big questions for sure. But before we get too far ahead,
Okay.
let's come back to those individual stories we were talking about.
The ones that really bring history to life.
We get so focused on the big picture sometimes.
Yeah.
But those personal journeys are what make it feel real.
And so relatable.
Yeah.
Like with Hafsa, her story really changes how we think about women in early Islam.
It does.
She wasn't just there in the background.
No, she really shaped her own path.
And had a huge impact on the Muslim community.
Her story shows us how diverse things were back then.
Like there wasn't one right way to be a Muslim or contribute.
And that's such a powerful message even today.
Totally. It's like we forget how rich and complex Islamic history is.
We get stuck on dates and battles.
But it's those everyday lives and choices that make it come alive.
And those stories can inspire us.
Challenge us, make us connect to something bigger.
Like Hafsa reminds us that real greatness doesn't have to be about success or fame. It can be about devotion, kindness, and helping others.
And about standing up for what you believe in.
Like when she wouldn't back down, even when she was facing her own father.
Right. She had that inner strength.
She stayed true to herself no matter what.
It's a good reminder that we all have a voice.
And we should use it to speak up for what's right.
Even when it's scary. You know what I find really inspiring about her story?
What's that?
Is that it doesn't end with some big dramatic event.
It's quiet.
Yeah. She spends her final years praying, serving others, just reflecting.
Like she found peace in those simple things.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It reminds us that the most meaningful moments can be the quiet ones.
Away from all the chaos.
And those moments can have this ripple effect.
Think about all those people visiting the Prophet's mosque.
Standing where her house used to be.
Her life and her faith still touch people all over the world.
It's pretty incredible. And it reminds us what Dr. Seligman said.
About this just being a starting point.
There are so many stories out there waiting to be discovered.
Stories that can change how we see Islam.
And make us rethink the past. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
What stories from your own life do you want to share with the world?
What lessons have you learned that you want to carry with you?
Because you're a part of this story too.
A story that connects us all.
And your choices matter.
So go out there and make your mark.
Leave a legacy that you're proud of.
One that inspires others. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into history.